just a brief story about the origins of Clay Stories. So this was the brainchild of my friend Owen Deering when we were at an Ensika about 5 years ago. We came out of a pub with a bunch of people, and we had just finished eating, and we had just finished telling a whole bunch of Clay stories just spontaneously, like we all do when we're here, sitting around the bar, sitting in the lounge, in the corridor, or wherever we might be. So Owen had this great idea to make a proposal to Ensika that we have a presentation called Clay Stories. And here we are the fourth time. So without further ado, we have a robust lineup of invited and submitted storytellers, and we'll have some time, hopefully, for an open mic segment. So as you're hearing the stories, begin to formulate your own in your mind. And the only two requirements, well, there's three requirements of telling a story. Number one, you're telling a story, you're not giving a talk. Number two, you're limited to 5 minutes, and James will grab you by the scruff of the neck and toss you out of the room if you go over 5 minutes. And number three, if you're not having fun, then you're not telling a good story, whether the story is funny or sad or tragic or emotional or provocative. You have to be having fun. Okay, so our first storyteller is my co-host, James Watkins.
Okay, the title of my story is One-Way Ticket. And the story is about how everything changes and the power of positive influences. I grew up in Athens, Alabama. My parents were proud farmers and makers. My mother made quilts, and my father, he fashioned many of his own farm tools. I give credit to my parents for my interest in rituals and visual things. My mother believed in mood colors. She believed that red and orange would make you more alert and happy. And my father believed that by painting our farmhouse true green, that it would ensure a good harvest. So if you can imagine 6 kids, 3 girls and 3 boys, dressed in red and orange, running around a greenhouse, making mud castles and mud cakes. That was my upbringing. So when I graduated from high school, I enrolled in a community college. I took painting, drawing, and design courses. In the painting studio, the students worked in cubicles, and we worked in isolation. But across the hall in the pottery studio, they were mixing glazes and making clay, and they were building a new kiln from reclaimed brick. Many times they would make homemade pizza and a baker's chicken wrapped in clay and fired in the kiln. In the pottery studio, they seemed to be having a party every day. So one day I went into the studio. A friend was working on the potter's wheel, and I asked if I could make a pot. And he said, "Go away, you're bothering me." So I thought, okay, I'll make him mad. So I said, "Anybody can do that. It looks easy." Of course, he got upset. So then he got off, and I got on the wheel, and I made this short, dumpy, ugly little pot. But from that moment on, I was obsessed. I was in love. All I wanted to do was make clay and make pots. So the studio, you know, it was closed on the weekend. I enrolled in the pottery class. I left the window cracked. I would crawl through and make pots. So my instructor...
That was a heck of a big window.
My instructor was Paul Moleski, a young Polish-American who wore clay on his jeans like a badge of honor. He was a graduate of the Kansas City Art Institute. During spring break, he invited me to go to Kansas City with him to meet Ken Ferguson and to have an interview for acceptance. I went there and had the interview. I got a scholarship, and Ferguson gave me a job mixing clay for the studio. So I went back to Alabama with Paul and finished a year working with him. By that time, I could make big pots. So I got a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to Kansas City. When I got there, I had my first critique with Ferguson, and I'd made these huge pots. I thought I was going to be a star. I thought he was going to really love me. But he said my pots were big and ugly, and he made me put them in the recycling bin, and I was devastated as I watched my pots dissolve into the water. But of course he was right. My early efforts were less than perfect. They wiggled and they wobbled and they were too heavy. But with a lot of practice and a lot of hard work, they got better. But I kept money hidden under my mattress for a whole year, just in case I couldn't make it. But I never had to use it. And the photograph of me on the left, that's from the good old days when my hair was bigger than my butt. And it's testament to the fact that all things change. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Our next person is Rebecca Boatman. And Rebecca is a retired teacher, taught at college in Dallas. I've known her for many years. She and I have done many primitive firings together. And the name of her story is Where There's Smoke, There's Fire. Rebecca.
Thanks. I have to add one thing because I have a short story, but this piece is about my professor, John Miller, who I'll talk about in just a minute. And when I found out he had passed away, he always talked about jealous hands always were together, and those are the hands over my heart holding one of his pots, always together. When I started in Texas, I moved to Texas, and I'd been teaching elementary school, and I told John Miller, I said, I couldn't teach clay because they didn't have a kiln. He said, you don't have to have a kiln to teach clay to kids. All you need is a trash can or a barbecue grill. And so I said, really? And I got really hooked on primitive firing. I was like the queen discovery learner. I had to try all sorts of different things. And I got a job teaching high school in a suburb of Dallas, and I immediately got those kids out there helping me build crazy fires out of all kinds of things and all kinds of things that would hold fire. And pretty soon the school grew and got bigger. And you know Texas schools want to be really big, so they built a multi-million-dollar school. And they called and said, guess what? We're giving you a patio to put all those trash cans on because you're always doing all that crazy firing. So I had a clay room with a patio so we could do primitive firing. It was really pretty special. And the project I'm talking about is a sawdust firing, and I know probably a lot of you understand that, but you make these little pots and you put TerraSig on them and you burnish them, but they're not fired, they're still greenware, and you layer sawdust pots, all the way to the top. And then you put a piece of newspaper down and light that sawdust, and the newspaper gets that sawdust to smoking. There's really no flames. It's just smoking. It's just barely coming out of the can. Well, I did that firing that day, and about 10:30 that night, Mickey Harper, the plant manager, called me. Rebecca, do you have one of those trash cans going out on your patio? Yes, Mickey. He said, well, the fire department just called. They're on their way. You better get over there as fast as you can. So I threw on some clothes, jumped in the car, drove about 10 blocks, and when I turned the corner, it wasn't one fire truck. It was 3 or 4 fire trucks. If you've heard of circling the wagons, that's what they'd done to my trash can. They had made a huge circle of fire trucks around my little bitty trash can. They'd drug it off the patio and put it in the middle of the parking lot. I jumped out of the car. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Rebecca Boatman. I'm the art teacher. Those are just little kids' pots in there. There's not any fire. It's just smoke. He said, lady, you don't have to worry about it. We put it out. I said, no, there's kids' pots in there. It's an assignment. He said, oh, well, maybe you can save them. I said, not if you put them out with those high-powered hoses. It was sort of like adobe. It was clay and sawdust. The only problem with the thing was after that happened, the fire department said, every time you do this, you need to call and tell us that you're going to be smoking pots. I said, okay. And I said, so then if you get a call about a fire at the high school, you're not going to come? He said, no, we won't come. But it's still there, so it never burned down while I was trying to smoke pots.
So our next story is Kelly Savino. Kelly and I know each other for a long time through clay, obviously, and through clay art. And she's going to tell a story about process over product. And it will evoke one of our clay art legends as her mentor. And I'll let Kelly take over from here.
Thanks. Oh, wow, there's a lot of people here. Hi. Yeah, I was, when James was talking about watching those big pots dissolve into the water bucket, that's kind of what has to happen to your ego when you start as a potter. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about was what I learned in the process. Early on, when you're super confident, you don't know what you don't know yet. And one of the things a teacher has to do is help you get to that place, hopefully without hurting your feelings too badly. So one of the things that I've learned is that a story is one of my most important tools in the studio. It's a good tool for teaching, and it's a good tool for exchanging information with other potters. 25 years ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to throw. I'd been a hand builder, but everybody knows that's not really right. You got to throw because that's the real deal. I had a Reader's Digest book that had a section on throwing pottery. And there was a picture in there of how to build a potter's wheel. So I was a newlywed, and we were living in some lady's basement in the middle of nowhere, and she had a carport. So we went and found lumber. And I stirred up some cement and rocks, and I made a flywheel, and we built this wooden, from the plan in the Reader's Digest book. It was a little picture about like that. I didn't have bearings or anything, so I just put a pipe on top of a nail, and it kind of went wobbledy-hop, but I didn't know any better, so I learned to throw wobbledy-hop pots. And the problem is, since I learned from looking at this Reader's Digest book, I hadn't mentally reversed the photo of the guy throwing, right? And so I started throwing with my right hand down inside the pot, which was fine. If I was pulling little cups and bowls and things like that, I did fine. But if I got very big, that clay was spinning into my fingertips, and they'd go to pieces. So at some point, I decided I needed to take a clay class, and I signed up for a week at Appalachian Center for Craft with a guy named Mel Jacobson. Mel knows what he knows, and you don't argue with Mel about what he knows. So here we are. We're all lined up on our wheels. It's the first day of class, and I'm throwing away, and Mel comes by, and he looks, and he says, "You're throwing with the wrong hand." And I said, "Oh, Mel, I've been doing this for a year. I don't think I could change now. That's the way I learned, and and I went on, and he listened. And then he said, "But you're throwing with the wrong hand." And the woman next to me chimed in, "Oh, we're all different, aren't we? Everybody does things a different way. Isn't it great we're all different?" And Mel smiled and nodded and turned back to me and said, "So you're throwing with the wrong hand." So he convinced me I could switch. He said, people lose their hand, they learn to cut their steak and write with the other one. It's muscle memory, and if you work on this, you'll learn it. You'll ruin a lot of pots, but you'll get there. So I started ruining pots, and before too long, I realized that I had gotten out of my own way, and I could throw something big. So I made the biggest piece. Now, in retrospect, this was the Grecian urn of, right? At the time, it was the biggest piece I'd ever made, and I was so proud of it that I started to panic. You've all done this or seen students do this, where you just kind of sit there and pet the pot, right? Like, wow, don't go anywhere, right? And so, and Mel came by and watched, and he said, "Are you going to finish that pot?" And I said, "Mel, this is the biggest thing I've ever thrown. I'm afraid I'm going to ruin it." And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Kelly, you're not that good." right? He said, we could take that pot and every pot in this studio, including mine, and throw them down the gully out back, and the art world will have lost nothing. This is mud, right? And so Mel had me throw 60 pounds of pots without keeping anything. And it was cruel. It was brutal. But I have to tell you that when you know it's going in the bucket, it doesn't matter. It's like, how thin can I get this before it collapses, and how tall? You learn where that death point is, right? Because you might as well work them all until they die, right? It was an amazing experience. After a while, when they got better, he let me keep them long enough to trim them and then throw them in the bucket. And then when I started to complain, he said, didn't you fly here? How many pots do you think you're going to put in your carry-on bag on the way home? But I grasped for the first time, and I had to relearn it my whole life. It's not about the piece. It's about learning the process. I wasn't paying to make a pretty thing to take home to my mother. I in my 40s, went back to grad school and paid good money to have somebody kick my butt and hurt my feelings, and I'm damn glad I did. But the nice thing is, at the beginning of my classes, now that I'm a teacher, I will tell that story to my students, which gives me permission, without hurting anybody's feelings, to walk up to a student who's hanging onto that pot and put my hand on their shoulder and say, Mark, you're not that good. Thanks.
Our next storyteller is Paul Andrew Wanless, and I've known Paul since he was a student. He and we co-authored a book together, Alternative Kills and Firing Techniques. Yay. And now he's a professor at Harold Washington College in
Thank you. All right, well, we were supposed to practice our stories before we came, and I did, but I'm going to be telling different stories. But I'm still going to get it under 5 minutes, so I'm just going to like spitball some stories here. But yeah, one of the things for me is about all the relationships that we have in clay and all the experiences that we have in clay. And like you mentioned, we wrote this book together in clay. But things didn't always start off that way. When I was a student, thought I knew a lot of things, thought I was learning things in a proper way, but my professor was Victor Spinsky at University of Delaware. So Victor was the kind of professor where if he thought you were thinking a little bit too much of yourself, he would find ways to bring you down a peg or two. So one time Roseanne Galt came through and she told us about paper clay and how to make it. So then Victor gave us an assignment to get 2 buckets. You put paper in the bucket, blend it, and then put a sieve over here. Pour the pulp in there, get the water out, and then pour it back in the other bucket. And then we had a solder mixer, and then you get it to a certain state, and then you put the fiber in there, and you have paper clay. He goes, so I want everybody to do that, make a little batch, and then bring me a ball of clay, and then I'm going to go ahead and, these aren't pictures of stuff I'm talking about. But he's like, I'm going to take your ball of clay, make it into a little coil, and bend it, and I should be able to see little hairs there. Then I'll see how well you did. So, of course, this is like my second, third semester, and she came through, he was telling the story, and just like an undergrad, I'm listening to some of it, but not all of it, because I think I know what I'm doing. I made clay before, and I've done it 50 times already for him. So I went back there, and I did what he said, and I come back, and I give him the ball of clay, and he makes the coil, and he bends it, and there's no hairs coming out. I'm like, uh-oh. So he does it again, nothing. He's like, did you put anything in here? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, tell me what you did. I was like, well, I had the 2 buckets, and I processed it like you did, and I had the bucket of the paper water, the bucket of the fibers in there, so the clay was ready, so I took the bucket with the paper water and poured it in. He's like, wrong bucket. I was going for the fine particles. And then a few years after that, we were as undergrads, we had to learn how to fire the gas kiln, and we were responsible for the undergrad work. So he was telling us stories about, he could fire by color. So we would watch him fire by color, and he'd always say, take really good notes. So when you see the cones going down, look for the color there, and then you should get to the point where you can do that. So I was maybe like a junior at this point. So again, feeling pretty good about myself. So he's like, Paul, fire the kiln. You're responsible, because we did it in shifts. He was there while we did it. So I told him everything was going well, and I was talking again about how I thought I was probably at the point where I could, fire by color. He's like, oh, okay. So I go back to check the kiln a few minutes later, or about a half hour later, and the kiln pack is off the top. I was like, I can't see the kiln. So I look on the bottom. they're gone too. So I'm like panicking now because I'm responsible for this kiln. It's all undergraduate work, and my kiln packs fell down, right? It just had gone through body reduction. It's like, okay. So I go into Victor's office. I'm like, Victor, we've got a problem. He's like, what's the problem? I was like, the kiln packs, they fell down. They must have exploded or something. He goes, no, they didn't fall down. I pushed them down. You said you could fire by color. Let's see how that works out. So of course, I'm panicking. So he lets me sweat for like about an hour or so, checking the kiln. Then eventually he came back and goes, I'm going to help you fire this by color, but you know you really can't do it by color yet, right? I'm like, yeah. But I have learned how to fire since. So with James, I met James, like, he was friends with Victor. He came through when I was an undergrad, and that was my first time meeting him. And then, so, fast forward, I'm on a board of directors, and I'm a director at large, and I'm responsible for the breakout sessions. And one of the editors, Suzanne Turtelou, was editor for Lark, and she was going to do a session on how to be a writer for Lark books. So I was like, oh, that's good. So I had to, organize all this. And then she was like, well, one of the ways we do it is sometimes we have topics, and we look for artists to write the books. I was like, okay. So just learning more about it. She goes, by the way, do you know James Watkins? I was like, I do, actually. And I met him years ago when I was a grad student in Arizona. I was taking some creative writing, and I interviewed James for stuff. So I do know him. I have his phone number. And so she goes, well, if you can call him, let him know that we would like him to write a book about alternative firing, and we would like him to write it. I was like, okay. So I called James up, and so I explained this to him, and he goes, well, I think you just got done writing that architecture book. And he's like, well, I'm kind of busy, and writing a book's a lot of work, but I don't really want to do that. He goes, if you want to co-author it with me, then we can do that. You can write about things that you can do, and I'll write about the other stuff. And I'm like, no, James, that's not the question here. It's, do you want to write the book? I've only been out of grad school a couple years at this point, so I'm like, no. He's like, you went to school for creative writing, et cetera. You can write. I'm like, James, that wasn't the question. Can you do it or not do it? So he's like, just ask her, see what she says. I'm like, fine, knowing she's going to say no. So I called Suzanne back. I was like, I asked him, and he said, he's really busy, but he wouldn't mind doing it. But he said, if I co-authored it with him, then he would do it. She goes, it's okay with him, it's okay with me. That's how I got into writing books, by mistake. And then the last one, am I under 5? I'm spitballing them out here. Okay, so then we had to shoot this book, right? So we wrote the book, and then everybody who's in the book, Linda and Don Ellis, Randy Broadnax, we all went down to Asheville, and then Rob Pullian, his place he's like in Asheville. It's kind of on top of a mountain where his house is. So we went there it was like 4 or 5 days, and the whole book was shot there. All those firing processes happened there. There's a photographer there. But again, he lives on top of a mountain, and any of you have been in western, North Carolina and Asheville, all these driveways that go up are gravel, right? So I had this pickup truck, no weight in the back, and then there was I think one truck and then a van, and then I was last. And Rob was like, when you start coming up this hill, keep your speed, because if you slow down, you're going to get stuck or start sliding back. So I'm like, I don't think I can go up this hill then, because I'm from Delaware. It's flat. This is way up here, and it's like, they're like, you'll be fine. We'll keep an eye out for you. So they said, just keep with the curves. So we're going up. Everybody's going, and I'm trying to keep my speed. I don't want to go too fast because I don't want to catch up. And so they're starting to get away from me a little bit, and I start slowing down, and there's a little bit of a curve there. So I slowed down too much. Then all of a sudden I lost my traction because I have no weight in the back of the bed. So I feel like I'm sliding down a little bit, and I'm having like this instant panic attack. They're all going up the hill. I'm like, all right, this is how it's going to end. It's like, this is not the thing. So it's going back a little bit. Then all of a sudden, coming down the hill is James. And if you guys know, like Don Ellis, Randy Broadnax, and James. So they come down the hill, because I guess up there you must have been like, Paul must be rolling down the hill, because he's not. So all of a sudden, they're coming down. So the 3 of them got in the back of my pickup truck to weigh it down. And I got back up to the top of the hill after that, and I did not leave the top of that hill till we were done. So that's it.
Click through the rest of the slides. Good. You can't tell a book by its cover. And the title of a book or the title of a story often kind of belies the real subject matter and the real nature of it. And Lisa G. Westheimer is going to tell a story that illustrates that notion or that mantra oh so well.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Sorry, but my story's sad. Sorry. On May 27th of last year, which was 2017, I'm in my studio. It's really late at night. And I just made 6 plates. And I rolled them too thin, and I cut them funny. And they were really ugly. They were warped, and they were just really flawed. So I was about to throw them back into the reclaim bucket, but the phone rang. And it was my brother telling me my mother was in cardiac arrest. So I dropped everything, and we ran up there, and she passed that night. So suddenly, those 6 ugly duckling plates were the bridge between my life with my mother in it. And mind you, we had a very warped and distorted and complicated but loving relationship, and my life without her. So I decided to keep them. I was making those plates. They were the last 6 of 40 that I was making for a workshop I was going to at Peters Valley School of Craft, which is my second clay home, and all of the kind folks that staff it are my crazy cousins. Kind of lost where I was going with this, but I decided that I was going to take these plates with me and raku fire them. My mother loved bling, so I had this great gold luster glaze, and I thought that the carbon and the crackles would be a good metaphor for my mourning for her. And also their very flawed appearance would be a good metaphor for our relationship. Now, Peters Valley, when they heard that my mother passed away, they sent me this gorgeous bouquet of roses. And my art making practice is based in symbolism and ritual. So I dried them. And I spread some in the sea, because my mom loved the beach. And I took the rest of them with me. So 2.5 weeks later, I'm sitting in the ceramic studio at Peters Valley. It's the first day of the Big Burn workshop with Bruce Dennart and Steve Cook. There's about 14 other people, and I only know Bruce and Steve. And I'm sitting there with this stack of god-awful plates, and my heart is broken, and I'm shattered. And it was just, I was a lot weirder than I usually am. So I didn't want to set this really mournful tone right out of the canon at this workshop, so I took Bruce aside and I said, can we fire these over lunch, just the 2 of us? And he said, sure, whatever you want to do, no problem. So we stacked the kiln and we lit it and we sat down to wait. When it came time to pull, everybody in the workshop came out. And they stood around me, and they stood around the cans, and they stood around the kiln. And when we took the cover off the kiln, I yelled, I love you, Mommy, this is for you. And I just burst out crying, and I sobbed through the entire time. But somebody took my smartphone, I didn't know it at the time, and took pictures of the whole event. Another person videotaped the entire event and gave me a copy of it. Bruce and Tom Byron right there, who I just met that day, pulled and held them out for me so that I could spray them with ferric chloride. I am sobbing my heart out. Jack, who's in the corner up there with the sunglasses, he made sure that every single one of those plates got a rose on top of it. So after that, we just fired as usual. 5 days firing around the clock. We pit fired. We put a line of gasoline on the ground and lit it to light that pit fire. And Jack taught Momi how to breathe fire. And we chinoed and salt fired and rakued and just wood fired 24/7 till we dropped. And during that whole time, we had the usual shenanigans that always go on these workshops. But people took me aside throughout it to tell me how much it meant to them to bear witness to and participate in the firing of my mother's plates. And now these ugly ducklings are my treasures because they symbolize my very flawed love and life with my gorgeous mother and my love for the clay community. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Vaughn Wascovich, and Vaughn is professor of ceramics at Texas Tech University. I've known him for many years, and we've done many wood firings together. And Vaughn. He's also a master kiln maker, builder.
Yeah, something anyways. Lisa, thank you for your story. I really appreciate it. I lost my mom 3 years ago, and my last show was dedicated entirely to her, so I feel you. So we're at the eloquent and life-changing portion of the program here. So I was out at Red Lodge a few years back, and I don't know if you were Red Lodges, it's in Montana, and they always told us, be careful of the bears and wildlife and stuff out there. So we were firing out there. My friend Robert Boomer Moore and I, we go out, and we're hanging out there. So late at night, we were at the studio and making work and got done. Come back the next day, and the dumpster is just destroyed. The bears had been there, and they'd thrown some slip away and stuff, and the bears had pulled everything out of the dumpsters, and I got all this cardboard with bear footprints and claws that I have in my studio now. But at the same time, I went, I'm on bear watch. I gotta find a bear, because I'm from Texas, gotta see a bear, right? Grew up in Idaho, never saw a bear, but now I'm in Montana, gotta find a bear. So I'm out there. I called my wife, I said, send me that trail camera we got at home. So she FedExed me a trail camera, gets set up, I put it on the dumpster. I'm like, sweet. And my friend Boomer's like, well, how's this thing work? I said, well, you see that little red light? Takes a picture, got it. He's like, sweet. Well, we had to go back out, and as you know, there's shenanigans, as we all talk about. Well, it was my night to have fun, so I had to get a fan, and we go back out there, and Boomer's like, I think the fan's out back by the kiln, da-da-da. So I go get a fan, come back, but no Boomer. I'm like, where the hell's Boomer at? So then he comes walking, and he's like, oh, where'd you been? I said, well, I got the fan. Come back in, and I'd also set up my camera there, ready to go. Next morning we come in, I take the little SD card out, put it in my computer. I had 500 pictures. I'm like, sweet, I got a bear. Cat, 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 cat. I had 499 pictures of cats and this. I felt something pop right here when that came up. I was like, holy shit, that's hilarious. There was a guy out there, Ryan Wilson Kelly, he was doing this piece, and he was making a Sasquatch piece, and this is a paper mache head. He sculpts the head out of clay first and then makes paper mache after that. Well, Boomer went and grabbed it, took a picture, obviously. But it was a lot of fun. So here's another important thing. This is Frank. I do not own an armadillo, but as I said, I'm not from Texas. The first time I said y'all in class, I had to take a minute and go outside. But James invited me to come down to Junction, Texas and fire with him, and a whole bunch of us were down there. And so we were firing the wood kiln, and I pulled the late shift with another friend of mine named Rolando Shaw. And Ro and I are firing late at night. It's like the 3 o'clock in the morning shift, right? Well, it's Texas, it's summer, you gotta stay hydrated, right? So, all the best stories start out with hold my beer and watch this. So we're at that point in the program. So I see this armadillo walking over. I'd never seen one before, but I'm like, that thing is cool, man. It's Satan's guard dog. Check this thing out, right? So we're sitting there, we're firing, and I'm like, here, Ro, hold this. And I walk up to this armadillo. So Now, this is the point where I say, everything I know about armadillos comes from Dora the Explorer, right? I expect that I'm going to walk up this thing, surprise it, it's going to roll into a ball and go down a hill. So now I'm channeling all of the videos you've ever seen. If you're going up to a predator, you make yourself as large as possible. Like I needed to get a little bit bigger. So I'm walking up to this thing, middle of the night, and I'm not like from here to this monitor from this armadillo, and I think it's the best idea for me to go like that. This is where I learned a hell of a lot about armadillos. They don't roll in a ball and go down a hill. Those little bastards jump straight up in the air. Now this one, Frank, he's kind of a jerk. Frank jumped up. He's right here. I swear to God, he had blood red eyes, fangs, claws like Wolverine, and did this Karate Kid bullshit. And just hung there, and then landed and came at me, right? And this is when turned into, oh shit! And the worst part of the story is Roe dropped my beer. Because he was laughing so damn hard. Thank you.
My first studio was in a 3-story, rickety brick and wood frame building in the middle of a commercial village. And I had the second and third floor, and I shared the second floor. And remember, rickety wood frame. I shared the second floor with a ballet studio. That's a topic for another story. I had studied raku pottery in graduate school at Rhode Island School of Design, and I decided that it would be a really good idea to put my raku kiln, an electric raku kiln, on the flat tar and gravel roof of this building. So I was smart enough to lift it off on cinder blocks and a stand so it was safe. I brought an electric kiln outside. The electrical outlet was 30 feet away on the second floor. So I went across the street to get a 30-foot, 40-amp, 208-volt extension cord. There's no such thing as that. That's also a topic for another story. So I put this extension cord together. I put the kiln out on the roof. I plugged it in. I had my assistant help me. Nobody had ever told me that you couldn't do raku in electric kiln, so I did raku in electric kiln, and it was flawless. It was beautiful. Fired the kiln up in about 2 hours, took the pots out, put them in a container, which I also lifted off the tar and gravel, and did my smoke firing in the container, and everything was wonderful. I did it again the next day, same assistant, perfect results. About a week went by and I decided I was going to do raku again. So I put the kiln outside again. My same assistant came over to help me. We did the whole thing again. It was perfect results. And remember, this is a flat roof, so while the pots are cooling, we're sitting on the edge of the roof, our feet are dangling over, and we're just kind of talking and waiting for everything to cool off. And I hear fire engines. So I immediately panicked, but I realized and remembered that the fire station was only about a mile away, and we would hear fire engines all the time. So it was just, I was a little more sensitive because I had just done raku, and I figured the fire trucks were coming to get me. Well, the sirens got closer and closer and closer until the fire truck was right there in front of the building, and here we are with our feet dangling off the end of the roof looking at the fire trucks. The fire guys get out of the truck, they put their uniforms on, they put their helmets on, they grab their axes and their hammers and their hoses, they go inside the building, and we don't see them. They come out, they're looking around, they go inside again. So Dan and I scamper to the other side of the roof. We look over into the backyard, and they come out the back door, and they're looking around, and they're scratching their heads, and they come back out to the front. They're looking around. They're talking to each other. They're scratching their heads. And in about 15 minutes of this, they get back in the truck, and they drive away. So later on that afternoon, I go downstairs, and it's an ice cream shop that was downstairs. And if you're from New England, you know Brigham's Ice Cream. This was the original Brigham's Ice Cream shop. So I walk into the shop, and it's pretty empty because it's the middle of the afternoon, and I say, Bob, I saw all these fire trucks. What happened before? What was going on? He said, Steve, you wouldn't believe it. All of a sudden, in the middle of the lunch hour, the place is packed with people. It fills with smoke. So I call the fire department. By the time they get here, the smoke is gone. They go in the basement, they look behind my equipment, they look under my counters, they look in my cabinets. There's nothing. And they left. I said, Bob, I hope that never happens again. So I went back up to the roof, and I'm trying to figure out how I made this happen. He said it smelled like a fireplace. It smelled like a wood-burning stove. So I went back up on the roof, and I'm looking around the roof, and in the building next to us, there's a stockade fence here up on the roof. Behind the fence is their heating and ventilation system. So this one time, the third time that I did this, what obviously happened is the HVA system was on. It sucked in the smoke. It ventilated it through his ice cream shop, and in a matter of minutes, it was ventilated out, and that was it. I since moved my raccoon kiln to a friend's house out in rural Massachusetts. Our next storyteller is Mark Eisenberg, and if he tells the story that he is planning to tell, then it illustrates what goes around comes around. Mark.
Thank you. Hey, y'all. I'm from the South. But I live near Chattanooga, but actually I grew up in Miami. I was really lucky in the 9th grade. I had an art teacher, and for some reason I really enjoyed clay that 9th grade. So after I graduated from the 9th grade, I was going to go, into school, high school. I spent the whole summer with him making pots, and it was just a magical thing to have a teacher like that who would, gave me his whole summer for me along. Anyway, I really had a good time, and I really learned a lot with him. Then I graduated and went to high school, and then when I was in high school in 1965, I guess, to 1968, we had 3 art teachers. I mean, isn't that amazing? I mean, and in Chattanooga, we just did a workshop for this place where I teach some classes. We had a workshop for 50 teachers, and it was so cool. But I mean, it was one teacher for each school, and I had 3. Anyway, Gene DeSmet became he was my teacher, but he also became a family friend, and he was a real special guy. And it was really great, more clay, and I just got to keep doing this whole thing with clay. So I ended up there was a ceramic league in Miami, and I was, just out of high school, and my dad drove me down there. We met some people there, and I became the youngest member of the ceramic league in Miami. And that's kind of cool. I was really young. They let me in, and it was pretty exciting. They sometime in those 3 years that I was in high school, Charles Counts, who lives in Rising Fawn, who was actually a student of Marguerite Wildenhain, he was teaching a workshop at the Ceramic League for a week. So my dad and I went down there, and we met, had some conversations with Charles Counts. And what was really cool is turns out he has run a program every summer in his pottery workshop. He even has a book, Pottery Workshop. He made that book after I left, though, because it's a bunch of people that I all knew and went classes with. But anyway, so it was really cool. So I did my, graduated from high school in 1968, and my parents gave me a car, and I drove to Rising Fawn. And I got to live in this log cabin. It was attached to another log cabin. And V.C. Dibble, does anybody know that name, V.C. Dibble? He was helping Charles Counts. And so I lived in this little house. Oh, it had no running water. So every afternoon we'd go to Haley's Pond and go swimming. I was really young. I was really from Miami. I smoked a lot of pot. And I got all these people running around naked. I thought it was pretty amazing. Anyway, I was really a bad influence on a bunch of adults. So anyway, we did that whole summer, and working with Charles Counts, you start with steps. I don't know if any of you have seen his book, Pottery Workshop, and it's steps, 1, 2, 3. 15 is a teapot. I didn't get to 15. I didn't make any teapots that summer, but you start with 1, and it's like you don't save anything. It's day after day of recycling and recycling, so you really don't get too attached to anything. So I went then after I graduated from high school. I went to the University of South Florida, and I went to Miami-Dade Junior College, and I actually had Dwayne Hanson was my ceramic teacher. Do you know who Dwayne Hanson is? He made bodies. Football player. There's one I think we have in Chattanooga is an old lady sitting in a chair. Anyway, so he married a Playboy bunny named Liz. They lived in this cute little apartment. He was cool. He looked like Custer, the general who got killed. He had long, pretty hair. He was really, he was a really cool guy and married to this Liz. Anyway, he made the ceramics he did when I was there. He would make cherubs. So, he made those bodies, but then he made cherubs, and he had like this whole thing of cherubs he made over their bedroom. It was pretty cool. So I actually got to work on his body, and it was pretty cool. And it was amazing that I got to spend that kind of time with somebody like that. It was, it was pretty cool. So after that, I graduated, and I went to University of South Florida, and I had Alan Eaker and Charles Fager as my ceramic teachers. But it was it was a fine arts degree, so I had to do art. And all I really wanted to do is be a potter. So Charles Fager was actually he's an awesome potter. But I don't know if you all remember, he'd made those, there'd be like masks of him in porcelain, and he'd have welding glasses, and they're gold covered. I don't know if anybody remembers any of those pieces. They were pretty cool. And one time, I guess we used to call him Chief. Anyway, one morning we all came in, and he had made a bowl. It was like this really big bowl, and because he said something to the effect he just wanted to let us know he was the real chief. So it was interesting. Also, his teacher was Sheldon Carey, and he had one of those wheels where you throw and then turn it upside down and pull. Has anybody seen that? Oh, cool. It's like, and of course he let us all try it, and of course that thing ate me up. I was a mess. I think one of my favorite things when I was in college was we had Clayton Bailey came for a week. And that's the only thing I really remember from college is a whole week of Clayton Bailey.
He smoked a lot of pot.
Yeah, it was the 70s. So I remember Clayton Bailey with those nose mugs. I hope there is a book that above Clayton Bailey, and a couple of Ensekas. It was, I guess, in Texas, and I'm not sure. I'm sitting there talking to some guy at lunch, and he's got that long mustache, and I look at his name tag, and I go, "Oh my God, Clayton Bailey!" And I ran into some other people. And I said, "That's Clayton Bailey," and then everybody was all excited. We all got to take photos with Clayton Bailey. And I hadn't seen him in so many years, and it was just so interesting. But I remember he would take a grease gun, pack it with slip, and it would just pow, 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 and that's how we would, do scene. Oh, somebody doing that? Thank you. Anyway, so that was, I think my favorite thing about college was Clayton Bailey. So anyway, pots I make. Anyway, when I lived I went back to look at Matt, and I ended up in that I ended up back in that house. I had no running water. So I started going. It was too cold to be in a pond because I'm from Miami. I'm a wimp as far, hot and cold water. So I started going to Cloudland Canyon State Park and to take my showers. And I would do my laundry, and I would pay for the laundry. But the manager of the park would try to run me out of the park every day, and he would call Charles Counts, and he would say, keep him out of the park. And Charles said he had no control over me, which he didn't. Anyway, after that, I went back to Miami, made pots, taught at a couple places, and actually I became a firefighter. So anyway, and now I own the Lookout Mountain Pottery, and I just have a good time. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Christine Poole. She's from Santa Fe, New Mexico, a studio artist who makes wonderful sculpture.
Oh, you said all kinds of stuff about me. Hi, everyone. So, as artists, sometimes we're building our sculptures, and sometimes our sculptures are building us. So this sculpture was part of a series that I was really scrambling to get ready for a show where the opening was in a week. And, it was going great. She fired beautifully, and I was finishing the undercoat and just getting ready to do the final finish, and I had set her sideways on the table so that I could touch up the underside, which might seem really silly because whoever actually sees the underside of a life-size sculpture, right? I actually know the answer to that, but that's another story. So that's what I was doing, and the dog comes over and gives me her finest, I need to go outside right now whine. We've all heard that, see? We've all heard that, right? So I get up to go and open the door, and I don't know what happened, but if you've ever wondered what would happen if you took a life-sized ceramic sculpture and dropped it onto a concrete floor from about this high, well, now you know. Smasho, right? It was a mess. I flipped out because she was one of the key pieces for this exhibit, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Little side story, I had posted that image online sometime after this had all happened, and I had written in the post that I was very upset that day. And my husband, who's also an artist, Colin, who was in the studio with me the day this happened, read the post, and he said, well, if very upset means you were bent over double screaming, yeah, I guess you could describe yourself that way. It's a little bit of character building happening at our place, right? So I'm standing there, and she's all broken all over the place, and Colin says, don't worry, I'll fix her. She's gonna be fine. And I'm looking at the carnage, and her little head is sitting there looking up at me with her sad little eyes saying, what have you just done? And there's no way I'm convinced. I can't imagine how any of this is going to be fine. But he was determined that we were not going to give up on her. So he gave me a hug, handed me a box of Kleenex, and said, let's go, get in the truck. And off we went to Home Depot, and we bought bulk supplies of repair materials. So, I hit the wrong button, sorry. Yeah, so it was kind of like assembling a gigantic 3D puzzle. I got to handle the archaeological dig portion where I took all the little tiny shards and pieces and figured out how they fit together and made all these little character codes of how we were going to do it. And Colin actually engineered the reconstruction part. We figured that since she so kindly exposed the whole inside to us, we might as well rebuild her stronger and better than she had been before she fell. Our motto is kind of like over-engineer everything. So we attached the legs and the head back to the torso with rebar. We lined every cavity with lath. We put tons of industrial strength epoxy all over everything. In 2 days, 16 tubs of epoxy, little bit of Bondo, and a whole lot of sanding later, and she was reborn. And she is so strong, I don't think she could be broken again if you tried. So here she is, whole and complete, and she's called Commodity, and she's about child marriages and human trafficking. So graffiti is oftentimes considered an act of vandalism, and I chose it to represent the desecration of a young girl's life. So she's actually graffitied with the words property, goods, chattels, possession in 14 languages that represent the worldwide occurrence of these atrocities. So the fact that she was totally broken and yet was still able to come back stronger to tell her story, I felt was a very powerful and inspiring undercurrent that actually made her more complete as a piece in the end. So what she taught me was that you never can actually tell what somebody has had to go through to get to where they are, and that in clay and in life, being broken does not in any way mean that you're defeated. And the happy little footnote to this story is about 5 days ago, somebody absolutely fell in love with her. And so after all this stuff, she's actually going to get to live out the rest of her life in a sunny and beautiful new home on the West Coast, for which I am incredibly grateful. And I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
When we put together our list of storytellers, one of the things that we ask them is there anything special that you'd like us to say when we introduce you? So our next storyteller, Kim Chapman, writes me back and she says, well, you know, if it's appropriate, you could say that I'm a recent graduate. I just graduated in May from the Cleveland Institute of Art. Wait a minute. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is awesome. We in the 4 storyteller installments that we've had, we've never had a young person who just graduated from art school come up, you know, and have the nerve and have the courage to come up and tell a story. Well, when I met Kimberly just a little while ago, that hope and that wish was immediately dashed. The title of Kim's story is Nostalgia, What's It Good For?
You're a very bad boy. Hi, friends. Jeez. So I'm guessing I'm probably the most nostalgic person that you will ever meet on the planet. Childhood memories play over in my mind like a broken record again and again and again. And you know what? I don't mind at all. I think back every day, several times a day, to my childhood home, to my family, to the laughter and love that filled that home. This is the person you were expecting to see, I think. That's me up there with my 2 little bunnies, Dusk and Dawn. And if someone was going to say to me, how would you describe nostalgia, I would point to that image. Because nostalgia, in a nutshell, is a wistful yearning to return to one's past as one remembers it. So you can see I'm a huge fan of nostalgia. And I was doing some further research on nostalgia, and I was shocked and I was horrified when I realized that in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, nostalgia was actually considered a disease. And there was this young Swiss medical student by the name of Johann Hofer. And Johann just happened to notice that so many of the Swiss soldiers had all kinds of mental and physical ailments. Everything from melancholy to loss of appetite to fever to heart attacks to even suicide. And he and his contemporaries thought they came up with a great idea. Their idea was, if we can just locate the nostalgia bone inside the soldier's body, we can cure them of their homesickness because we'll just remove it. And I am thinking, whoa, wait a minute here. Remove the nostalgia bone? If every thought we have is filtered through our past experiences, where would that leave these poor soldiers? So other cures included, for curing the nostalgia virus or disease, included leechings, stomach emulsions, doses of opium, and even a return trip to the Swiss Alps. That does sound better. But there were a lot of doctors and other people that weren't so lenient with soldiers that came down with nostalgia. There was, it was 1733, there's an account of a Russian general who told his troops, the next soldier to come down with the nostalgia virus is going to be buried alive. And he made good on his promise not once but twice. So, further study, I was so happy to see and so relieved to see that in the past 10 years, new research shows that nostalgia is a great thing for healthy living. It does many things for us. If you are prone to reminiscing, you are probably in a better mood. You probably have better reason to plan for the future. You get along better with others, and wait for this one, even improves your marriage. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I am so glad I didn't live a few centuries earlier, because I probably would have been on the front lines for leechings or worse off, being buried alive. I love the idea of the nostalgia bone, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And when I was preparing for my BFA defense, I thought, gosh, I'm going to use that nostalgia bone as a metaphor for memory. And I started building nostalgia bones. In building structures, you can see a small sampling of them on the screen, that were representative of specific childhood memories, so that I could make my memories permanent. The first sculpture is the tree fort that my brother and his friends built in the backyard woods, called No Girls Allowed, for obvious reasons. The second one is the toboggan that my father would drag down from the attic stairs every winter for us kids to use. And the third one's a simple rendition of my childhood home. These sculptures mean a lot to me because they do make my memories permanent. And with a healthy dose of nostalgia, they help ensure that the self doesn't disappear. And as we get older, I think that's a really important thing. Thank you.
Oh, Marcia. Yeah, that's you.
Okay, sorry. Our next storyteller is Marcia Caragien, and Marcia is a professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati, and her story is a Japanese encounter.
Wow. I thought it'd be a little intimate room. So in the 80s, I had a good friend, Trish, living in Japan, teaching English. A lot of people did that back then, and it was a good gig. You got paid a lot, and you got to live in a foreign country. But when she indicated to me that she was going to be leaving soon, I thought, I better get over there. This could be my last chance to live, for free in Kyoto. She was based in Kyoto. I was doing raku, and it's the birthplace of raku. She knew the language fluently. I needed to get over there now. So since I'm a teacher, I went Christmas break. So it was December 1987 into January 1988. So I flew to Kyoto, and she and I traveled around for a while. And then after a week or two, another friend of ours came from America, and the three of us were traveling around. And, but after a while, our second friend that came over, Paul, and I decided, we better give Trish a break. House guests are all fine and good, but, they can be tiresome. So we decided to give her a break and travel around for a while on our own. Visit some of the ancient kiln sites, and Bizen in particular. But before we left, she was able to procure us a little note, a note of introduction. That was the custom, probably still is in Japan. You didn't just barge in on someone and barge in on an artist or a person or a place. You needed a note of introduction. So somehow she handed us this note. I have no idea. None of us remember at this point. It's been 30 years ago. But we show up at this little potter's house in Bizen in the middle of the countryside. I have no idea how we got there. But so we knock on the door, and this potter's wife comes to the door, and she looks at us, and she looks at the note, and she looks back at us, and And then she finally goes and gets her husband. We don't know a word of Japanese. She doesn't know a word of English. She goes and gets her husband, who comes and looks at the note and looks at us and looks back at the note and probably rolled his eyes, but no, he probably didn't because he was too polite. So finally, motions for us to follow him into his studio. And we get to see, you know, this beautiful studio in Bizen. And he's showing us around, lots of body language. And he makes a gesture, and my girlfriend says, I think he wants you to throw on the wheel. And I'm like, no way. And I'm like, no, I don't have my apron. I don't have my tools. I can't throw. And she's like, get on that wheel. You will insult him, which is right. So I get on the wheel, sit down, and it's going clockwise. And I see it's a shimpo, so I go so that he turns it counterclockwise. And so I start throwing. And what do I decide to throw? But a T-ball, because I'm going to show the Japanese how to do that. Yes, I am. Yes, I'm. So he watches me for a while, and then he goes over to his wheel by the window, and he tries to throw counterclockwise on the right. And by golly, he's having trouble doing it, and he chuckles. And we're like, yes, we broke the ice. He actually cracked a smile, and he chuckled, and all was fine and well after that. And so he did his thing, and I threw a lame little T-ball. And, I think I'm supposed to show a slide. That's him trying to throw, and he does his thing, and I do mine, and, wow. And we clean up, and he decides, I guess these girls are okay, and he motions for us to follow him. So we walk through the village, and he takes us into a museum, and we're looking at this beautiful Bizen pottery with that luscious black clay that I got to throw with. And after a while, he humbly points to himself. And we realize that's his work in the museum. And that's when we realize we're really in the presence of somebody pretty special, maybe a national treasure. And so anyway, we finish our trip. We come back to America, and Trish keeps her promise. She comes back to America as well, and after a while, we're from the East Coast. She comes to visit me in Kentucky and brings a gift, as most, everybody brings house gifts, right? And it's a real Japanese thing, too. But so I open the gift, and it's the T-bowl that I thought went on the reclaim table. I forgot he had me sign it. He trimmed a foot, signed it, dated it, fired it in his wood-fired kiln, somehow got it back to the girl who wrote the note of introduction, who my girlfriend doesn't even remember who that is. Somehow she got the T-ball back to my friend Trish, who got it to America and then brought it to me in Kentucky. And if the house is burning down, that's what I'll grab.
That was great. Our next storyteller was scheduled to be Kevin Crow. I'm sure a lot of people here know Kevin. Kevin couldn't make it to the conference this year. Kevin is being treated for multiple myeloma. He's good. He's in great shape. Treatments are working really well. And the reason that he couldn't come is because he gets his treatments every 6 weeks. And he had a treatment scheduled for last week that had to be rescheduled for today. And he didn't want to jeopardize his treatment regimen, so he apologized. And I said, Kevin, there's no apology necessary. Is it okay if I share why you're not here? He said, sure, if you think people would be interested in knowing. So if everybody, Kevin and I are dear friends, if everybody can just give a quick round of applause for Kevin, I'll share that with him. Just a few of his recent pieces. So our next storyteller is Peter Aguero, and Peter is a New York-based clay artist. He works at the Brick House, a ceramic studio in Queens, and he is, among other things, a regular storyteller and host for The Moth. So we have with us, and this is no pressure on Peter, of course, but we have with us a professional storyteller, and the title, not the title of his story, but the theme of his story is The Healing Power of Clay.
All right. I don't remember saying that. So it's October 26, 2015, and I walk into the doors of this studio in Long Island City in Queens, not that far from my neighborhood in Queens. I'd never been in a ceramic studio, never really been in any kind of like visual arts studio, physical arts studio before. I walk in and I see it's at once the most cluttered yet clean place I've ever seen. I'm not sure how that works. And I look on the shelves and there's like every kind of bowl and cookie cutter and like tennis ball and like cornstarch, and it's all next to each other. And I can't figure out, none of that stuff seems like it makes any sense to be next to each other. And this woman, the most kindly woman I've ever seen, walks up to me. She's got bright purple and pink socks and sandals on, and like just tons of kindness in her eyes. And she looks as if she has been happily cutting her own hair for the last 45 years. And she comes up to me and she says, "Are you here for Peter?" And I say, "I am Peter." And she says, "I'm Liberty." And I said, "What?" And she said, "My name's Liberty Valance." And I said, "What?" And there's a little squirrely dude with a red beard. He's making this creature with these furry legs, and he starts laughing. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to fit in here because this is where the weirdos are. This is all going to be fine." And then all of a sudden, I'm approached by this man. He's a familiar figure, a robust, solid, older gentleman with white hair and a white beard. You can't swing a dead cat at this conference without hitting one of them. There's 24 of them in this room right now. I didn't realize that NSECA had a mascot, and it is the robust older man, looking like a hipster Santa Claus. So he comes up to me, he says, "Are you Peter?" I said, "Yes," and I'm Peter too. And I said, "All right." And he's got these strong hands, and he shakes my hand, and he says, "Have you ever thrown on a wheel before?" I said, "No, I don't really know what that means." And he says, "Come with me." And we walk over. So about 5 days before that, I'm laying on my living room floor, and I can't get up, and I'm crying on my living room floor. I've had I've had depression, anxiety my entire life, and this was a bad one. I've been working as a performer for the last 20 years, doing improv and comedy and touring the world, touring the country, touring the world, crazy stuff, and doing movies and stage stuff. In the last 10 years, I was doing what I called storytelling, but because I started making my living from it, it was first-person autobiographical narrative, because it can't be a simple thing. But the thing was, the medium I've been working in for the past 10 years was my past. And while you can talk about your past and learn and change yourself, from talking about your past, the thing is that medium never changes. Who you were in the past is always the same. When you go back and revisit that person, it's always the same person. And a lot of times, the stories that we tell are the ones in which we change. Those are the things that make stories great stories. And most of the things that change us are pain. So for the last 10 years, I was going through my life and just reliving pain and trauma over and over. And now I'm trying to write a new show, and it's Friday night. My wife's helping me with it. And when it's time to start doing it, I throw my notebook on the floor and lay on the floor, and I start crying because I can't. I'm a crier. It's okay. But that wasn't like a new thing. But this time I can't get up. And she comes over, and she's reading my tarot cards, and she's combing my hair, my beautiful, luxurious hair. And then and I can't get up off the floor. She's holding me. She says, "Peter, you need to take a pottery class." And I said, "Baby, what are you talking about like that?" And she said, "Listen to me." So all right. So then the next night, she's about to take a shower. She says, "Peter, have you registered for a pottery class yet?" I said, "No." She said, "I'm going to take a shower. By the time I get out of the shower, I want you registered for a pottery class." So I said, "Okay, she's the boss." So I get on the computer. I find Brick House Ceramic Arts 2 miles from my house. I find you can do a 1-hour wheel throwing class. I sign up for it. So now 5 days later, I'm sitting there next to Peter, next to essentially myself in 30 years. I'm looking into the future at this very gentle man with very strong hands, and he's speaking this language in my head, and I'm looking at the clay on the wheel with this intense feeling feeling a physical deja vu, as if I've done this before, as if it feels like it's something, a part of my life in the past, maybe a long time ago. It's in my soul somehow. It's something that I feel like I've done before. It shows me how to center. It shows me how to drop a hole. It shows me how to bring it up. Essentially, it's all translating in my head as one simple thing. You take a breath and you make a movement and the shape changes. And you take a breath and you make a movement and the shape changes. And that, like, the static of the nonstop beats of the anxiety in my head and my heart pounding is slowly going away as I'm watching this lump of clay turn into something that isn't ephemeral, that isn't just a story or performance. It's something that exists in the world. And I can't believe, as soon as it begins, that hour is over. And I explained to Peter how much it meant to me, that I, could spend this time with him and learn how to do something new and how much I needed it. And, he starts to cry because he's a crier too. I'm like, this is me. Gives me a hug. I'm going to be a good hugger in 30 years. So's Peter right there in the middle looking like Chelsea Santa Claus. So like, yeah. It's all, yeah. So as I walk out of there and I get home, my wife tells me when I get home, the first thing I did is I sat on the couch and I said really quietly, as if I was somewhat embarrassed about it, I said, I really love that. I really loved it. And I immediately got back on the computer and I signed up for a full term of classes. And the thing is, like, now I found this brand new medium. I found something for myself, a brand new medium that could be, it doesn't have to be what I have been. It doesn't have to ever just stay static, right? It's this brand new medium where it could be who I want to be in the future. It could be, who I think I am now. It could be also honoring who I've been in the past, or something that has nothing to do with me. But the most important thing is that all I got to do is take my time and take a breath and make a movement, and then the shape changes. Thank you very much.
So I'm glad that we have some time for open mic. Who would like to come up and tell a story? You've already. Come on up.
Hi. Hey, James. My name is Mapo Kennard. I teach over at Xavier University in Ohio. in New Orleans. I grew up in Ohio. I am so nervous, but I have to tell this story because it's a story I tell my students. I have another sister. I have a sister who is artistic. I've been doing clay for since 1975 or something like that. So it's been a while, and I love clay, and I've been teaching it for a long time. And it's my favorite thing to do. But my sister was the artist. She was the one that really had the talent. And they used to tell us that whatever it is that you do as a kid, whatever it is that they told you stop doing when you were a kid, that was the thing that you were designed to do as an adult that would make you happy, because nobody had to tell you, to do it. You were motivated by this obsessive thing that you did. So my sister, she, as a kid, would be in a crib, and one day, my parents were taking care of her, and the crib, she's older than me, just a year or so, and the crib goes crashing to the ground. And what happened is she took all of the screws out of the clay, out of the crib, right? And she works today fixing glasses. Go figure, right? So I'm thinking, I completely forget about this story until one day I'm in the classroom with my students, and I'm talking about clay, and I'm looking at the slip bucket, and looking, it's like I really love doing this much more than paperwork at school. For those of you who are teachers, you know what I mean. I'd rather mix clay. I'd do anything rather than paperwork. So I realized that there was a story my mom used to tell about me, and it never made sense. And then all of a sudden I go, oh my goodness. And there's a story where my dad was taking care of me, another crib story. And I'm in the crib, and my dad is older. And he falls asleep. And my mom comes home, and she sees it. I'm an artist. I had made a mural on the whole wall next to my crib, using, of course, the only material I had at my disposal. And so, it never made sense to me why I like gushing. I love I love the feel of clay. So every semester, I have my students, one of the first things that I do is I bring them over to the slip bucket, and I go, get in there. So thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
Yep. Hello, my name is Diane Hart, and I've been a potter for over 40 years. I don't know about a lot of you, but I always scrounge materials. I always, somebody be giving away a kiln, I'd fix it. I'd build my own kiln with used bricks. Well, I finally, 10 years ago, got a new kiln. Not a hand-me-down Bailey, but a brand new kiln with a car kiln and thin shelves. And being on the Cape, I always get really busy in the summertime, and I needed to go away like in May. So I worked my butt off, did everything that was really difficult, like my teapots and anything that was double-pieced and covers and whatnot. And I said, I'm just going to flip the shelves and redo them. So I did that. I went up to my attic. I got my EPK, my alumina hydrate, mixed it up, painted the shelves, loaded the kiln, fired it beautifully, because Bailey kilns are good. And I went on vacation. So I come back 2 weeks later, and I'm like all excited, and I pull open the kiln, and my shelves are orange. Orange. When I was brushing on the kiln wash, I had dipped before I was mixing my kiln wash, I had dipped into the spodumene bag. So it was 90% spodumene, 10% EPK. Now, I had never had new shelves before. And anyways, this was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I just went to bed. And my husband came home and I said, just get me the biggest jug of wine you can get. And I was just so pissed at myself. I'm like, really? So anyways, I took apart the whole kiln. The pots would not come off those shelves. Okay. So the next day, I was so mad, I ordered all the shelves again. I sat down and threw every pot that I had screwed up because I was so pissed. And when I get pissed, I can really work fast. So, but a few years ago, Malcolm Davis had said he had done that also. So that made me feel a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me share. So I'm going to fulfill a little bit of your dream. I haven't graduated from Maine College of Art yet, but I graduated in the spring, class of 2018. And my name is Amanda, and this is the story of Harper Cleve Coviello. But before I start talking about Harper, I have to start talking about her mother, Kelly. Now, I had met her mother, I'm from Portland, Maine, in a coffee shop one night. I was doing an open mic, I play guitar, and she really liked my music, and we started talking, and she's like this weird, skinny, kind of balding, she had like shaved all her hair off, giant Roman nose, like as hipster as they come. And she didn't really wear deodorant, so she had this kind of like smell, but it wasn't like a bad smell, it was just like a human smell. And I was kind of like, this chick's kind of cool. I don't know, she's kind of weird, but she's kind of cool. And so we had kind of seen each other like passing up and down the street quite a few times, because if you've ever been to Portland, Maine, it is the smallest dang city you've ever seen in your life. And so it's one of those things where like everybody knows everybody else. So I friended her on Facebook, and so we would see each other in passing. We'd see each other on Facebook, and I see that she posts on her Facebook, and she says, "My partner has been abusing me, and I am pregnant, and I don't know what I'm going to do." And I reached out to her, and I said, "Look, I haven't walked this road. I don't know what you're going through or what you're feeling, but I will walk this road with you, if that is what you choose." And so we met for coffee the following weekend, and we talked, and we cried, and we ate a whole ton of food. And after that, we were like this. And I just remember connecting with this person on a level that I have never instantaneously connected with another woman in my life. Even my very best friend, who I've been best friends with for almost 13 years. This was just something completely curveball. And so as she was going through the process of this and the stress of this abusive partner and trying to get a restraining order against him and trying to figure out what she was going to do, if she was capable of being a mother, it turned out that her chronic illnesses that had been affecting her body for years made it incapable for her to carry her daughter to term. And that was something that she had to come to terms with, and that was incredibly difficult. And we got together again, and we cried, and we ate a whole ton of food. And I said, "I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're feeling, but I will rock this road with you." And so as she was going through this, I just felt so incapable of doing anything that would make a difference in this situation. I couldn't make her body better. I couldn't make her partner be there for her. I couldn't make a restraining order happen. But I could make clay. And so I made for her Harper's baby book. And she talked to me about Harper all the time. And she would say how she had dreams about her and how she would run through this open field, frolicking, a little kid, 5 years old, hadn't even been born yet, but she knew it was her. Sunflowers, sunshine. And I couldn't get that image out of my head. And so I put it into Harper's baby book. So I made 4 little flat tiles about the size of a bread box. And I tied them together with little pink ribbons, and I coated them with a lot of pink underglaze. And I drew Harper running through that field and being free and being born and being the vibrant, beautiful little girl who brought her mother's friendship into my life and changed my life without even physically existing. And you cannot tell me that there is not something out there that brought us together for that little girl. And the most beautiful part is that now that I have made that object for her, it exists in her stead. It proves that Harper Cleve Coviello was a real person who mattered to 2 people, who was loved by 2 people. And her abusive father cannot touch that. Thank you.
I'm a crier also. We have one final presentation, and I'm going to call Lee Birmingham up to honor one of our clay legends, not only here in Ensika, but in 20th and 21st century ceramics.
I'm that old, robust, gray-haired mascot. Okay, I lay claim to that. Can you hear me better without this? Yes, no? Yes? Okay, I'll use it. A quick story. Talking about the power of clay, talking about the power of us, the power of you. Yeah, I'm a crier. Robin Hopper is one of us. Robin Hopper made a tremendous difference to the kids I teach. In the classroom, in workshops, as a reference, a resource with his books, with his videos, with the things he did. I'm going to tell you a quick story about one student. And you, as NSECA, and Robin Hopper, as part of NSECA. I took a student to Portland a long time ago. This is the kid you never got a full sentence in an hour. You're lucky if you got 3 words a day. We drove from northern Utah to Portland. That's a 12-hour drive. I never got a full sentence in 12 hours after trying hard to strike up a conversation, or at least discuss what was going to happen as we got to NSECA. I think you know who I'm talking about. This kid walks through the door at NSECA, and he meets you, all of you. He enjoys the opportunity that you provide by being here. The shared spirit, the shared family, the shared joy of clay. The same thing that Robin has shared with us for years until he passed this last year. The drive home. The kid never shut up. It was a life-changing opportunity because he had a chance to meet with Jack Troy, Paul Lewin, Steve Branfman, James Watkins, all of you, and share with each of you as you shared your joy of clay. Robin Hopper was the consummate sharer. I couldn't walk into an NSECA conference. Those of you that know me, I always had a trail of baby ducklings. Walking along, I'd bring kids from all over. Seattle, 2012, we rented a bus. We brought a whole bus. Robin Hopper met us as we got off the bus, introduced himself, and shared with those kids. There's 50 of us on the bus. He took the time to make sure everybody felt like they were worthwhile and part of the Clay family. Now, we lost Robin. He is no longer physically with us. But we haven't lost his spirit. We haven't lost his compassion. We haven't lost his joy for life. We have his Swan Song DVD that he specifically put together knowing he was dying of liver cancer so that he could share one last time with all of us forever. Steve, myself, we've got a foundation set up to keep Robin Hopper going. There are Robin Hopper Swan Song DVDs over in the K-12 room over in room 317. It's $30 a pop, and the proceeds go to 2 really good causes. Robin is still sharing with us. Part of the proceeds go to the BC, British Columbia School of the Arts Council for young education and the education of the young in the arts. And another portion goes to the Jimmy Farber Foundation, or the Jimmy Fund for pediatric cancer research, because we all know too many that have suffered and have gone. You need to, if you get a chance, you need to pick up one of those DVDs and just listen to it, and listen to Robin sing. Thank you.
Whew. I'm a crier. Thank you all for coming. I hope you all had a good time. I'm sorry we didn't have time for more spontaneous stories, and I hope to see you all again next year at Clay Stories 5.